that wasn't the word he used. Maya Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had learned, over the course of 35 years of life, 3 of them spent carrying trays in a Chicago restaurant, that words spoken with absolute calm go further than any shout. She stood beside the table holding a bottle of mineral water, her uniform immaculate, her hair braided and tied at the nape of her neck, and 6 pairs of eyes turned to her at once as if she'd set off an alarm. She hadn't set off anything. She'd just told the truth. The Sterling was on the 41st floor of a building in the Loop, overlooking Lake Michigan, at an angle that was expensive enough that customers rarely actually looked at the lake. They were always too busy looking at each other. It was the kind of restaurant where the dishes had no prices on the menu, and where the manager, Diana Walsh, selected the service staff with the same criteria that casting directors use to select background actors. Enough presence not to clash with the atmosphere, enough invisibility never to disturb it. Maya was good at that. She had learned to be invisible the same way one learns anything difficult, through repeated necessity, every day, until the body simply internalizes it. 4 years earlier, she had an office on Michigan Avenue. A corporate translation firm she had built from the ground up, client by client, language by language, English, French, German, Mandarin, Arabic, and Japanese. 6 languages she inhabited with the ease of someone who grew up hearing the world on frequencies most people never tune into. She had a reputation. She had a name. She had a partner named Owen Hart. Owen was patient in the way that only the truly calculating can be. 2 years and 3 months of siphoning revenue, redirecting clients to a parallel company he had registered without Maya's knowledge, using her name on contracts she never signed. By the time the certification board launched its investigation, Owen had already transferred the assets and closed the office. By the time Maya's license was suspended, he was in another state under another name and running another business, completely untouchable. Maya was left behind. She was left with the debts, the lawsuit, and a very clear understanding. The kind of understanding that doesn't need to be spoken aloud to be absolutely real. That for a black woman in a predominantly white industry, being associated with professional misconduct, even as a victim, came at a cost that wasn't distributed equally. The board investigated with the enthusiasm it reserves for certain types of cases. The customers disappeared with the speed they reserve for certain types of people. She kept that to herself. She learned to carry trays and keep her face completely neutral while listening to conversations in 6 languages around the tables and not saying a word about anything. She was doing exactly that night. Until the 3rd time, Marcus Cole translated Heinrich Baum's objection as a compliment, and Maya realized she was looking, from a slightly different angle, at the same scene that had destroyed her life, and this time she had arrived early enough to change the ending. She set the bottle down carefully, and she said 6 words that no one at that table expected to hear from a waitress. The silence that settled in had texture, dense, warm, with the specific quality of the air before a storm that's already happening somewhere nearby, but hasn't reached you yet. The man at the center of the table was Etienne Rousseau, Franco-Swiss in his early 50s, the kind of elegance that doesn't need to announce itself because for decades he hasn't needed to convince anyone of anything. Short-cropped gray hair, a navy blue suit without a single unnecessary detail, and a quality of attention. When he looked at someone, he really looked, without the performative distraction of men who pretend to listen while formulating what they're going to say next. He was looking at Maya now. To her right, Heinrich Baum, the German lawyer who had flown in from Frankfurt specifically for this meeting, had come to a complete stop with his pen hovering over his notebook. He was watching her with an expression she recognized without having to think. The physical, almost bodily relief of someone who spends too much time speaking in a room where no one understands what he's saying. To Rousseau's left, Marcus Cole's shoulders were tense beneath his suit. In his early 30s, American, the kind of face that conveys competence before you have time to verify whether it actually exists. His eyes darted between Maya and Rousseau with the speed of someone calculating damage in real time. And at the head of the table, Preston Aldridge, the Chicago real estate developer who had organized the dinner, reserved the private space, and apparently also selected the translation service, looked at Maya with the expression certain men use when something that should be invisible starts talking. "She works here," Aldridge said, in English, with the voice of someone closing the matter. Maya kept her eyes on Etienne Rousseau. "The lawyer said the recourse clause in the contract exposes you to personal liability in the event of default by the secondary developer," she said slowly, precisely. "He said he cannot recommend signing without a specific amendment to that clause." A pause. Your translator reported that he was satisfied with the general terms. Heinrich Baum spoke in German immediately, pointing at Maya with a firm gesture. Maya translated before anyone asked. "He says that every word I just said is accurate." The room fell silent in a different way. Heavier. Marcus Cole opened his mouth. He closed it. "She's a restaurant employee," he said, his voice controlled but not entirely. "There's no way to verify—" "The revenue split for the venture," Maya interrupted, still looking at Rousseau. "The preliminary agreement signed in Geneva sets 60% for you and 40% for Mr. Aldridge's consortium. The contract on that table reverses that ratio. It's in Appendix C, page 8, second paragraph, in the definition of primary participation." Etienne Rousseau didn't move, but something shifted in the way he sat in his chair. A subtle contraction, an attention that was already total becoming even more so. He looked at the contract, then at Marcus Cole with an expression so quiet and so absolute that Marcus recoiled half an inch without realizing he had recoiled. Victor, Rousseau's assistant, who had been standing near the window all night without anyone paying him any attention, crossed the room unhurriedly and opened the contract to Appendix C. Preston Aldridge looked at the page. He looked at Rousseau. He looked at the page again. Marcus Cole picked up his jacket. He said nothing. He left with the specific haste of someone who knows there is no version of this moment where he comes out looking good. The door closed. Diana appeared beside Maya as if she had been born there. "My office," said the manager, her voice absolutely flat. "Please. If this story has resonated with you so far, subscribe to the channel. What comes next will surprise you even more." It took Diana 5 minutes, 18 years managing high-end restaurants in Chicago. Never, at any point in her career, had she needed to have this conversation with an employee. Maya Brooks was, without a doubt, the best floor manager Sterling had ever had. And Diana needed her to leave before someone from the floor above called to ask what had happened in the private room. Maya said she understood, because she did. The Chicago wind hit her as she stepped out of the building. Cold, biting. The kind of cold the city uses in the fall as a reminder that winter is coming and won't ask for permission. Wacker Drive pulsed with the movement of the night. Cars, pedestrians, the river below dark and indifferent. The whole city functioning without pausing to consider that Maya had just lost the only job she had, with 2 overdue bills waiting at home. She walked 3 blocks before noticing the presence behind her. Her instinct kicked in first. Dark glass from a closed arcade, a figure keeping a steady distance. She tested it, turned onto a street that wasn't her route. The figure followed. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her pace steady, breathed slowly, thought fast. The second man emerged from a parking lot entrance ahead. She stopped. They closed the distance without urgency, and the absence of urgency was what frightened her most. It was the movement of people who had done this before and knew they didn't need to run. It lasted less than 30 seconds. Victor emerged from a spot she hadn't anticipated, with another man. And what happened next was so precise and so silent that it would take Maya days to find the right words to describe it. No words, no injuries. The two men simply ceased to be part of the equation. On the ground, a card. Just a number. The paper was thick, expensive, and said it all. The phone rang 40 seconds later. Mademoiselle Brooks. The voice was calm, French faintly audible beneath the English, every word carefully chosen. Are you all right? I am. Those men work for Preston Aldridge. A pause. They won't get another chance. You had people following me. I had people nearby, he said. The distinction was deliberate, and he knew she knew it. 2 days later, she learned from an industry source Marcus Cole had been let go from the company that employed him. No statement, no public explanation. The kind of dismissal that happens when someone far above decides a problem needs to be removed before it creates others. Maya felt no pleasure. She felt the specific coldness of a score settled. The following evening at 7:30, she entered an unassuming French bistro in River North that had no visible sign on the facade and didn't appear on any search app. The address had arrived via text from the same number, with no greeting, just the address and time. Victor opened the door. Etienne Rousseau was seated at the back. He stood up when she entered. Maya stood still for a second. Over 35 years, she had developed a very precise system for gauging the kind of consideration certain environments reserved for women who looked like her. Etienne Rousseau had not consulted that system. During dinner, he listened to her the way few people do, with unhurried attention, not waiting for his turn to speak. She laid out her terms clearly. Only contracts and negotiations, nothing more, and she would relay what she heard unfiltered, regardless of the cost. "D'accord," he said. Agreed. She believed him. Have you ever had to speak the truth at a moment when it would have been much easier to stay silent? Share your story in the comments below. 3 weeks. Maya counted in weeks now. 3 weeks of conference rooms across 2 time zones, of real estate development contracts she read with the microscopic attention of someone who understands that a single paragraph can contain a trap wrapped in technical language. 3 weeks of Etienne Rousseau standing up every time she entered a room, of coffee always just right without her mentioning how she took it, of conversations that began on a professional note and ended in silences that lasted a second longer than necessary. She had stopped pretending she didn't notice. She had also stopped pretending that work was just work. On the 3rd Monday, reviewing the documentation for a new round of negotiations with a consortium of investors from Atlanta, she found a name in a footnote that shouldn't have been there. At first, it seemed like a coincidence. A Delaware-registered holding company with a mailing address she had seen before. Not the address itself, but the pattern. The same layered structure, the same way of distributing stakes among related companies so that liability never clearly surfaced. It was Owen Hart's operational architecture. She recognized it the same way one recognizes someone's handwriting, not by the individual strokes, but by the combination of them. She searched for 5 hours. The holding company was connected to an investment firm that had appeared in a lawsuit in Miami 18 months earlier. The lawyer who had represented the opposing party in that lawsuit worked at a firm that had listed Preston Aldridge as a client 4 years ago. Maya stared at the screen. Owen Hart and Preston Aldridge. The man who had destroyed her career and the man who had tried to defraud Etienne Rousseau didn't just happen to know each other. They worked together, and the new deal Etienne was about to close had both their signatures buried 3 layers beneath the surface of the documents. She had a choice. she could ignore it. She had been hired to translate, not to investigate. She could keep her head down for the second time in her life and keep surviving. She held on to that possibility for exactly 8 minutes. Then she closed the laptop, stood up, and went to Etienne Rousseau's office. He looked at her when she entered. That immediate, complete attention he gave to her presence, as if it were simply what one does when someone enters a room. She closed the door. She stood in the center of the office without approaching the desk. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About me first, and then about the documents." And she told him everything. Owen Hart, the suspended license, the 2 years and 3 months of systematic destruction that had dismantled what she'd spent a decade building. She told him what she never said out loud, that the reason her name had been so easy to use as a shield was partly because Owen knew, and she knew, and the board knew without needing to say it, that certain names pay higher prices for the same mistake, that the presumption of innocence has gradations that no one documents but everyone practices. The night at Sterling hadn't been just the beginning. It had been recognition. She had seen the same scene, with different faces, and arrived in time to intervene. And now Owen and Preston were together, targeting Etienne. He didn't move during the 16 minutes she spoke. When she finished, the office was completely silent. She looked up. Etienne was staring at her, not with his usual professional composure. There was a line between his eyebrows, tense and involuntary, the kind of expression that appears when a person is holding something carefully so as not to let it slip away before deciding what to do with it. It wasn't coldness, it was restraint, the quiet, absolute anger of a man who has just fully understood what has been done to someone right in front of him and is already calculating his response. "Show me the documents," he said, his voice completely controlled. "Everything." She opened the laptop. And for the first time in 4 years, she was no longer doing this alone. The following week was one of precise action and strategic silence. Victor coordinated a team of lawyers in Geneva and Chicago simultaneously. The documents Maya had found went to a forensic auditor specializing in corporate structures, hired within 48 hours. Etienne canceled 2 meetings without explanation and rescheduled 3 others at locations different from the original ones, the kind of precaution that reveals, without needing words, that the threat was being taken seriously in its full extent. Preston Aldridge was under investigation, not for the isolated Sterling incident, but for a documented pattern of operations spanning 3 states and at least 4 years of real estate transactions structured to benefit parties not appearing in the main contracts. The material Maya had found was the thread. What the investigators pulled from it was something she preferred not to try to imagine in detail. Owen Hart, too. Her name would return to the records. This time, on the side it should always have been. She processed all of this with the part of her mind trained to manage facts without letting them overwhelm her. The other part, the one that had been counting the days since she'd walked into Etienne's office and shown him everything that was broken inside her story, that was harder to manage. She had laid herself completely bare, and now she worked with him every day, and he was exactly the same. Present, attentive, the coffee always just right. And that should have been enough. Except that when you show someone the hole you carry and they don't back away, you start to realize what else they're doing. On Wednesday afternoon, he appeared on the 38th floor balcony where she had stepped out between meetings to get some air. The wind from the lake blew in clean and cold, and Chicago lay below with the peaceful indifference of cities that have seen it all. He stood beside her without saying a word for a moment. "How's your mother?" he said at last. Maya turned to him. It was the last thing she'd expected. "Better," she said after a pause. "She's been sleeping well this week. The new medication is working." He nodded, looked out at the lake. Mine was like that, he said quietly. She needed me to be okay so she could be okay. So I learned to look okay even when I wasn't. There was something about that sentence that needed space around it. Maya didn't answer right away. How long did it take to stop just pretending? She asked. He looked at her sideways. The afternoon sun streamed in from the side of the balcony, and in that angle of light he looked less like the man in a suit who commanded entire rooms simply by being in them, and more simply a man at the end of a long week on a high balcony above a big city. I'm still figuring it out, he said. Maya turned her eyes toward Lake Michigan. The distance between them was perhaps 40 centimeters. Neither of them moved. The silence that settled in wasn't the kind that begs to be filled. It was the kind that exists in its own right. Quiet, real, with edges she could feel without needing to name them. They stayed like that until Victor appeared at the balcony door to let them know the next call was about to begin. Neither of them said a word as they stepped back inside. But the moment had existed, and they both knew it. 6 weeks later, the lawyer called on a Thursday morning. Maya was in the kitchen of the Pilsen apartment when she answered, holding a cup of coffee she'd forgotten to drink. Her mother, Gloria, was sleeping in the back bedroom. She'd wake up soon, ask for tea, turn on the TV at the low volume she used when the world needed kindness. The call lasted 9 minutes. The certification board had formally closed the case. The new evidence, combined with the investigation into Preston Aldridge and Owen Hart's documented history in other states, was sufficient to overturn the suspension. Her license would be reinstated in 60 days. Her professional record, clean. Maya stood in the kitchen for a while after hanging up, coffee growing cold in her hand, looking out the window at the street in Pilsen, the painted curbs, a child on a small bicycle, a neighbor sweeping the sidewalk, the utterly ordinary life of a Thursday morning that didn't know it was any different from all the others. Then she woke Gloria. She hadn't said anything about the call yet. She just made tea, sat on the edge of the bed, and stayed there while her mother slowly woke up with that morning smile Gloria had always had. The smile of someone who decided, at some point in life, that waking up is reason enough. Gloria looked at her daughter. She looked the way mothers look when they understand everything without needing words. She reached out her hand. Maya took it. That afternoon, in Etienne's office in Midtown, she was standing by the window when he walked in. He stopped beside her without a word, following her gaze out at the city. "Good news," she said, without turning. "I know," he said. She turned. "Victor told you." "Victor told me." A pause. He was looking at her with that intensity she had stopped pretending not to notice weeks ago. "You've deserved this for a long time, Maya." The way he said her name, she noted it and didn't comment. "When I hired you," she said finally, "I thought you were taking an unnecessary risk. Someone with my track record, in negotiations of this magnitude." "I wasn't taking a risk," he said simply. "I was hiring the best professional I've ever seen work under real pressure." A slight pause. "And righting a wrong I'd witnessed." She was silent for a moment. "That's the most straightforward thing you've ever said to me." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not exactly a smile, but the space a smile occupies when it's about to happen. "I'm practicing," he said. Outside, Chicago was still Chicago. Noisy, dense, indifferent, full of stories unfolding on different floors of the same building without ever intersecting. Maya had spent 4 years becoming invisible in this city. She had learned to take up as little space as possible, not to draw attention, to exist on the margins. "I'm going to need to renegotiate my contract," she said. "Once my license is reinstated, my rate changes." "I expected as much. And I'm going to need my own workspace. I can't keep using a side table indefinitely." It's already taken care of. She raised an eyebrow. Did you know the decision would come today? He looked at her with that expression she had come to recognize over the past 6 weeks. The expression of a man who is rarely surprised, and who, when he is, decides very quickly what to do about it. I knew it was coming, he said. Not the exact day, though. The silence that followed had a door in the middle of it. Maya was aware of it. Etienne was aware of it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Sometimes that's what a fresh start looks like. Not an explosion, not an announcement. Just a Thursday afternoon, a tall window, and 2 adults who've spent weeks being careful with each other finally stopping pretending they have a reason to keep going. This is a work of fiction, inspired by situations many people will recognize as real. The betrayal of the person you trusted most. The quiet process of rebuilding yourself after everything falls apart. And the unexpected moments when someone chooses to see you when you'd learned to be invisible. If you've stayed with me this far, it's because something in this story truly touched you. Thank you for staying. The next video also has a story like this, the kind that stays with you. I'll see you there.